We're going to continue in a conversation that we've been having about Joseph. A man that's, again, in children's church, if you were in children's church as a kid or Sunday school, you heard the story. You know the coat of many colors. You know what God did. And you know all of these things. But sometimes as adults, we look at those things as good children's stories. It's good for the kiddies to get to hear that story. But if it's in the Word, it's good for us to hear it as well. It's good for us to step in. And so for the last couple of weeks, we've been talking about Joseph. And we went through this understanding that Joseph had a dream. Joseph had a promise. And we recognize that in Joseph having this dream and having this promise, that he might have gone about it the wrong way in telling his brothers and his family what was going to happen and what was in that dream. But the reality was God gave a promise, God gave a dream. And God was about sending him to a destination, but there was a process to get him from the promise to the destination. So often we don't like the process. God, here's the dream, here's the promise. I'm ready to just walk right into the promise. Because if you gave it to me today, I need to be ready to go with it tomorrow. And we get frustrated when the dream doesn't happen in the time frame that we think it should happen. There's a dream that God placed in my heart, and I was reminded of it this morning as we were praying in my office, of this dream that I had when I was probably 10 or 11 years old. And I thought, this is awesome. I can remember seeing this video on probably TBN at the time or something like that. It was something on there. And I was like, man, that would be awesome to happen here in our city. I was 10. I'm a long ways from 10 now. And guess what? I haven't seen the fulfillment of that dream. I'm guessing now that dream was not a God dream because it never happened. See, we get so caught up in that, well, it didn't happen in my time frame. The dream itself must have been long gone. I must have eaten the wrong kind of pizza the night before. I had a nightmare. It wasn't really a God-given dream. See, I challenge you today in whatever area of life that you're in. Man, if you feel something impressed upon you, maybe it is a physical dream. Maybe you went to bed last night and you had this dream. I challenge you to write them down. I mean, our phones today have this marvelous memo that you can either audio say it or you can write it down. Or if you're old school, you can write it in the journal. But I challenge you to write these things down because I promise you will forget. You'll forget aspects of a dream. You'll forget aspects of maybe it was a word that was highlighted to you when you were reading a scripture. And it may be 35, 40 years down the road before the dream that God placed in your heart and placed in your mind ever comes to being fulfilled. Because see, the reality of my dream that I had when I was 10 is we could probably make it happen now. We could probably move some stuff around in the budget to make this happen. I could go in and I could make something happen with moving some stuff around so that it would all of a sudden, it would be here. But in my heart, as I begin to process, I know it's going to happen, but I also know we're not ready. Because just to have something else, another something sitting on the property that all of a sudden all it does is sit there and it's not used becomes a waste. And God is not wanting us to have a dream to just have something to go sit on the back 40 and let the tires rot off because it's not being used. And so I know for this, there's going to be a time, and we're going to hear it as a leadership, as elders in the house, that God says, now's the time, get it done. And when it happens, the finances will be there where you're not trying to make something happen. So the dream that you have on the inside of you, even though you may not have seen it come to fruition yet, I'm asking you not to cast it down. Don't throw it away. Joseph could have done that from the promise through the process. He could have gotten over this and moved on and said, you know what? It's It's just too difficult. But from the promise through the process, there's a maturity that happens. Nobody likes maturity. There's times I would love to get up on a Saturday morning, turn Bugs Bunny on, listen to the Looney Tunes intro as it comes on at 10 o'clock on a Saturday morning, or at least it used to in the good days, and have no worries in life but watching the cartoon and going and doing something else. But see, there's a natural maturity that happens. We call it life. Sometimes it's fun. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's great, but sometimes it hurts. See, when we go through this from the promise through the process, there's a maturity. There is an aspect of suffering that begins to happen. Why? Because just like you and I, when we begin to mature in our body, when we begin to grow, when you went from being a really short person to a little bit taller person, your bones and your muscles, all these things begin to grow. And if you go back, for some of you, there was a long time ago. If you go back to Growing Pains, not the TV show, but the pains in your body where your body just hurt because there was something on the inside that was growing and stretching. It was uncomfortable. It was painful. But it was actually healthy. It was actually a healthy process. And so going through maturity and going through suffering can be a maturing and a healthy process. But don't raise your hand. How many people in the room like to suffer? I spent 3 hours on the couch last night suffering. Started about 6:45 and went till about 11. And I suffered. It was not fun. But it was even greater knowing that the Cowboys lost as well. So, I mean, it was great. So it was one of those, though, that knowing suffering can be tough, but suffering can actually be good for us. We finished last week, or the week before, in Genesis chapter 40. Let's pick up in verse 23, the very last verse of chapter 40 in Genesis. Yet the chief butler did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. How many of you right now, today, in this moment, feel forgotten? Feel like whatever was going to happen, you've just been forgotten. See, you got to remember now, the cupbearer and the butler both had dreams. And Joseph interpreted the dream. One would be put back into their authority and one would be killed. And Joseph told in this moment, he had told the butler, hey, when you're there, don't forget about me. There are theologians. We know that Joseph was sold into slavery around 17. And we know that he was put into authority somewhere around 30 years of age. That's a long journey. And in that long journey, there's some theologians that simply believe that he was in prison for 10 years. 10 years of being in prison. 10 years of being forgotten. And so if you start doing some of that kind of math, because we think of prison and we think of Joseph and, you know, he was told that you're going to prison. He was thrown in and it was maybe a couple of years, maybe a couple of months. He was restored. Bada bing, bada boom. Here he is back into authority. But if you start looking at it from the aspect of potentially 10 years, you can see where he begins to walk through, why did I make this decision? Why did I go back and tell them my dream? Why didn't I just keep it to myself? All the way up to the point that he interprets the dream and he says, hey guys, when you get up there, please don't forget about me. I think that was the moment that he thought, today's the day. I'm coming out of the darkness today. I'm being restored today. I'm stepping into that today. Here I am walking down the street. I'm at the street corner. Today it's going to change. And as those two went back up to wherever they were going, He spent another 2 years in that prison. Talk about learning to die to yourself. He probably went through anger issues, the struggles. See, we have to understand that God is an all-knowing and an all-seeing God. He knows what's going on. And I promise you that God would not allow you to suffer just to suffer. Now, there are decisions that we make that put us into a realm of suffering. And in those decisions, they can be painful and they can be hard. But it's still to point back to Him. It's still to point back. There is a why behind the suffering. There's a reason behind it. It's not that God's trying to punish you. It's not that God's trying to do anything other than to work out myself, dying to myself. Because the moment that I realize that it's about Him, the moment that I realize that everything that's going on, my life is to be a reflection of Him, that means things in my life have to die. It means some of my hang-ups, some of my things that I'm connected to, some of the pain and the thoughts. See, when Andy was here, Pastor Andy was here Sunday, and he stood right here, and he looked at Mandy and I, and he said, I believe the Lord is taking you to a season where you're like a Teflon pan. You're going to be unoffendable. And you know what my heart did the moment that he said that? It did not leap for joy. It was more like, you have got to be kidding me. Why? Why? Because to be unoffendable means you have to walk through some offenses. Okay, let me put it in a different perspective. Don't ever pray for patience. Patience comes out of doing hard things. I can pray for peace, but I am not going to ask God to give me more patience. So to say that you're going to be unoffendable means you're going to have to walk through some things that cause you to want to be offended, and you're going to have to process and filter those things out, which means you're going to have to go through some difficult waters. Means I'm going to have to die to myself. That means even in the proclaimed word of the Lord, which, yes, I want to get to a point that I am unoffendable. But I also recognize the pain that is accompanied with walking through those seasons. But I also understand that in walking in those seasons with that pain, there's a dying to myself that points back to Him. That says, you know what, God? Man, if this is the road I'm going to have to walk, I know that you're going to empower and encourage and strengthen on that walk. I know that He's there. God had a purpose, even in the forgetfulness of being left in prison for 2 more years. Maybe for Joseph, it was the final blow of thinking he can do it all in and of himself. Maybe it was a moment that would lead Joseph in his heart, that would get to a point that says, whether you leave me in the pit for the rest of my life, or you get me out, blessed be the name of the Lord. See, it's so easy for us to bless the Lord when we're standing on the mountain. When we're standing in our victory, it's so easy. Lord, we just bless your name because you're so awesome, because of what you've done and where I'm at. It's something totally different to say, Lord, I bless you today. I bless your name. I worship you while I'm sitting in the prison cell. While I'm sitting in whatever I've been placed in. See, it's so difficult to say that in the moments of hard, but God's wanting to reveal Himself in the moments of hard. He's wanting to reveal the goodness of God in the moments that we see that are hard and that we are difficult. Because what God's wanting to do is to reveal His glory, His goodness to the world around us. But how does God reveal His goodness and His glory? In this story, God's glory was going to be revealed through Joseph. So Joseph had to be I see a picture of a mirror. And in this mirror is reflecting what's in front of it. And we are to be like a mirror that reflects the goodness and the glory of God to the world around us. But what happens over time to mirrors? When you have small kids and you've got a mirror hanging on the wall and it's down low, what happens to that mirror? It gets fingerprints all over it. It gets smudge marks all over it. It has peanut butter swiped all over it. It has jelly swiped all over it. It has all of these things, and it gets to a point that it lessens the effect, the reflection of the glory, the reflection of the light to the world around. We have to get to a point that the Lord wants to clean us to a point that we reflect the fullness of the glory of God. That's what He desires, which means there's aspects in my life that I have to allow God to come in and purify and clean. And that's where pain happens. Joseph had to walk through areas in his life of being time in prison, not because he had done something wrong, because if you know the story, we know that he hadn't done anything wrong. Potiphar's wife accused him of sexual misconduct. He's like, I didn't do anything. I didn't even touch her. And nobody believed him, and he was thrown into prison. Falsely accused. Talk about a pride buster. Talk about the struggles of what's going on. But God's glory was for Joseph's benefit. And we get to see the aspect of this story. We see the beginning and we see the end for our benefit. So that when we're going through the process of fulfilling what the dream is God's placed on the inside of us, that we won't lose heart and lose hope when it gets tough. Because it will get tough. It will get hard. It will be a struggle. But it's walking those things out. God's glory, Joseph's benefit, our benefit. God's ultimate glory is what's to be revealed. And God's ultimate glory is our ultimate benefit. See, when I allow the glory of God to reflect in me and through me, this is how our city changes. This is how our region changes. This is how churches move from just simply we go to church for that little bit of time and we go about and we do the same thing. I get cleaned up. I wipe the mirror off on a Sunday morning and I go back home and I go back to work on Monday and everything goes back to the same old, same old. See, it's recognizing that in those moments when I go back to the office, when I go back to work, when I go back to the school, when I go back into wherever we do business, that I'm to go in and I'm to reveal the glory of God. I'm to reveal the power and the authority of King Jesus into our businesses. See, even you as an employee, for some of you, you have an opportunity to reveal the goodness. It doesn't simply come from the owner. It comes through you and how you reflect the goodness of God. Which means there's going to be times in the middle of the week that I need to stop and allow Him to clean up something. God, I don't have time right now. You know, those times when you were little, and maybe you're the mom that did that. You're in the store and you see something on your kid's face, and you're like, we got to clean the face right here, right now. And you start trying to clean, and the kid gets embarrassed. Mom, not right now. Everybody's watching. Not right now. When we get home. But see, there's something about in the moment that we have to be willing to allow the Father to come in that pain and in that suffering that's uncomfortable, to allow us to walk to be the reflection of the glory of God. Because when we say no, we hold back our world and our city changing. Isaiah chapter 30, verse 18. Therefore the Lord waits to be gracious to you. And therefore he exalts himself to show mercy to you. For the Lord is a God of justice. Blessed are those who wait for him. When you look in Isaiah 30, verse 18, the verse before, verse 17, it's talking about the coming destruction of Jerusalem. It was talking about there was a cost to be paid for making some of the decisions that they had made. There was some cleaning up that needed to happen. There was destruction coming. But do you realize that even with him saying there's a coming destruction, he was giving them hope? See, even when we're walking through the tough, just like Joseph, and he was walking through the process, and it gets hard and it gets difficult, there's hope. He gives you hope even in the midst of the turmoil, even in the midst of the struggle, even in the midst of the pain, even in the midst of what feels like a destruction of everything that I am. He gives me hope because he is a God of hope. Hope is what he is, and hope is who he is. God is waiting. Isn't it good to know that God is waiting? He's waiting for you and for me. He's waiting for us to get into this process where we're in the middle of all this stuff that's going on. He's waiting for us to finally say, all right, whatever you got to do, I'm here. Whatever needs to be cleaned up, I'm here. Whatever needs to be taken out and replaced, I'm here. I'm going to stop fighting it. I'm going to stop trying to battle against you. So we see in chapter 41 of Genesis, we see here a story that Pharaoh's dreams. And we know that in Pharaoh's dreams, it was coming in, and his dreams were real. They were real to this guy. And he asked all of his leaders that were around him that worshiped other gods, can you tell me what this means? Can you tell me what's going on? What's happening here? And amazingly enough, none of the other gods could tell him what was going on. But all of a sudden, after 2 years, oh yeah, wait a minute. There's a guy down in prison I was supposed to have reminded everybody. And so he went and he said, there's a guy that interpreted some dreams that we had, and he was exactly right. See, if Joseph, who was destined to be a ruler in this nation, had been released out of prison 2 years sooner, he wouldn't have been in the right place at the right time to have the impact that God wanted him to have the impact. See, sometimes we get so mad because things aren't changing, and God's simply saying, just hold tight, it's not your season. But I'm ready to go, God. I've learned everything I need to know. And guess what? If 2 years sooner Joseph had been released, all the things he would have learned through all the process wouldn't have been to the fullness of what God had designed for him to do. Because he would have come out of prison as a nobody, as a foreigner, as a slave, been released back into society, and may have wandered back to his house, back to his family, into another country. But see, we get so frustrated because we can only see what's right here in front of us. And God, who's standing up and sees everything for the way it is, he's going, just trust me in the process. God, I don't want to trust you. We have a free will, and we can forfeit what God's wanting to do, and we can do things that would jeopardize what God's plan is, and we can step out of prison early and miss the fullness of the calling of God on your life. Think about it. If Joseph hadn't waited the 2 years, hadn't been presented before Joseph, yes, God could have brought somebody else up. But this was part of Joseph's destiny. If Joseph hadn't have been there, then who would have interpreted the dreams correctly? How would his family have been saved? What would have happened to the nation? See, you have a free will. You can jump out at any time. But when you decide to come back, guess where you're going? Right back to where you were at. Because you'll never go any farther than you allow God to refine you. You can't get past that point. You don't get to skip go. You don't get to jump past certain points to get to another one. Because if you did, you would end up in a place, in a position that you had no business being in. Can you imagine the 17-year-old Joseph walking from his family saying, I've got a dream and you're gonna bow down to me? Walking into Pharaoh's house and said, hey, I got a plan. This is what we're going to do. One, he would have been killed. Two, he would have operated out of pride in such a way that he probably would have saved up all the stuff for himself. See, there was a process and a timing that is God directed. Thank goodness that things happen. Thank goodness that children in the womb have a time and a season that they spend time in their mother's womb. Why? Because that's the best place for them. There's seasons and times for everything that happens, and we have to be okay with the process. Pharaoh even had to asking his leaders of false gods. It's kind of like us sometimes in our own life. We've got a lot of false gods, idols in our lives. You may not go home tonight and bow down before something, but money. The drive to have more money can be a god. Technology can be a god. The desire to climb the corporate ladder can be a god. See, there's nothing wrong with money. But what's your driving force behind it? What is your drive? There's nothing wrong with climbing the corporate ladder. But what's your push behind it? See, we sometimes have to get to a point that we stop focusing on all of our other gods to get us there, and we focus on the true one God. That, Lord, I'm just going to worship you, and I know that as I worship you, that if you're wanting me to climb the corporate ladder, I'm going to climb it with you. Because if I don't climb it with you, I'm going to fail anyway. Lord, I know that as I focus on you, that you're going to help me be a better steward of what I'm already getting financially. Because I know if I don't have it with you, I'm going to blow it anyway. I need you in my finances. I need you. There is nothing wrong with technology. But there's something when we try to do all of these things apart from Him, we're destined for failure. We've got to partner with Him. How do we partner with Him? We die to ourselves and we walk through the process and we go through the hard parts. To recognize it's not about me. In chapter 41, verse 14, then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they brought him quickly out of the dungeon. And he shaved, changed his clothes, and came to Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I've had a dream, and there is no one who can interpret it. But I've heard it said of you that you can understand a dream to interpret it. Here he is, potentially 10 years in prison, now standing cleaned, smelling good, standing before Pharaoh. And Pharaoh says, I've heard that you're the guy that can interpret dreams. Remember, this is the same Joseph that when he interpreted the dreams to the cupbearer and to the people going back up, that he said, hey, don't forget about me. I got to do something to make sure you remember me. 2 years longer in prison, and now he's standing before Pharaoh. And Pharaoh says, I've heard you're the one. Verse 16, so Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, it is not in me. God will give Pharaoh an answer of peace. See, there was something that happened to Joseph in those final 2 years of being in that prison that refined him to a point that he recognized, I'm not going to try and force this door open anymore. I'm going to point everybody back to Him. I'm going to point anything that I do, it's back to Him. And if He wants to send me back to prison, if Pharaoh wants to send me back to prison, if that's where I need to be, I'm content. How do we know that he's content in even going back to prison? Because once he interpreted the dreams, Pharaoh looked again at all of his wise counsel and said, who do we have in the nation that's worthy enough to do this? To gather up all of these things, to figure out what the percentages look like, to figure out what needs to be gathered up so that in this time of overwhelming abundance, we can store up the appropriate amounts. Who do we have? And they all looked at each other and went, I don't know. But while you see the story, you see that Joseph stood back and stood there. See, if he was all about me, the same guy in the prison 2 years ago that said, hey, don't forget, would have said, I'll do it. Just pick me. But Joseph, in his growing and through all of his suffering, had gotten to a point that I will stand here, and if you tell me, go back to prison, I'll do whatever needs to be done. I'm not going to try to push myself in. I'm going to step back. I did what I was called to do. I delivered an interpretation of the dream. And if that was my destiny, I'm okay. But he stepped back. How many of us can be in a room and can be okay with being, Lord, if you bring me to the front, I'm good. But Lord, if you position me in the back, I'm good. I just want to be in your presence. Because to be at the front and not be in your presence is awful. I want to be where you position me. I'm okay with whatever way it looks. I'm okay with doing this the way you called it to be. Because remember, this was the guy that had been falsely accused, abandoned by his brothers, sold into slavery. But all along, the dream that Joseph had to be fulfilled. And we think some big, beautiful black car is going to pull up in our front driveway, and they're just going to usher us right to the front of the line. But see, the reality of the kingdom is, the majority of the time, you're going to have to walk through tough stuff. Don't you feel inspired today? Don't you feel just like, I just want to go celebrate now? I don't want to talk about suffering. It's not fun. Other than, I know that when we walk through those seasons and we allow parts of ourselves to die, that we see a greater aspect of who He is. And in that sense, that's amazing. That's amazing that we get to partake in those moments. This man had been forged in maturity in the darkness. Joseph left his home on a God mission to rule a nation, but he came in as a slave. His destiny was to rule a nation, but he came in like a slave. God has a destiny and a desire to see you be at a level that, man, only you and God know about. But so often, if we think it's going to look one way, you better put your pants on because it's not going to go that direction. Because even in the dream, there's a refining that happens. There's a dying to self that happens. You see all of the things that you see on TV, all of the actors and the actresses, the football players, the basketball players, the baseball players, the motivational speakers, the pastors on TV, all of these people have incredible, we're like, I want that. I want to be a billionaire. But when you talk to most millionaires and billionaires, they've been broke more than they've been rich. When you talk to people in athletics and sporting events, they're the guys that spend 20 hours a day between the gym and actually doing what they do. They're not at home doing nothing. When you talk about pastors and leaders and motivational speakers, you get an opportunity to see a 30 or 45-minute window of their life. But the hours of preparation that go into it are tough. Where God's wanting to lead you means there's areas of your life that you're going to have to be okay with saying, God, I'm yours. I position myself to let you remove anything that needs to be removed. That's the only way we can grow. The process is painful. God's perfection in your life is costly beyond belief. But you have a promise. See, we've talked about the promise and we've talked about the process. But do you realize there's a procession? 2 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 14. But thanks be to God, who in Christ always leads us in triumphal procession, and through us spreads the fragrance of the knowledge of Him everywhere. See, so the procession comes from the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire, when they would go in and they would bring defeat into a nation or to a battle of some kind, do you know what they did? They came back in from their battle, their victory, and they didn't walk in going, yep, we won. It was great. Should have been there, but we won. They came back in with all of the slaves that they had gotten and they defeated, and they pushed them down the road, and they showed off the spoils. They showed off the money. They showed off everything they brought back, and they stuck their chests out, and they said, look at us. Look at the banners. We brought in this. We defeated the enemy. But thanks be to God, who in Christ always, got to hear the word, always leads us in triumphal procession. See, God's already there. He's already given you the victory. We go through all of the rest of Genesis chapter 41. We see the interpretation of the dreams. We see all that God did. But you have to understand, this servant boy, this Hebrew servant boy, had no business being in Pharaoh's house. So the 2 years that we even look at knowing he was in prison, we're like, what was God doing? I believe God was preparing Pharaoh's heart. So that when this young boy that came and interpreted this dream, when this young boy came, all of a sudden he would hear it, he would see it, and he would believe it. And then second, Joseph had to put himself into a position that, you know what? I'm not the solution to every problem. There's only one solution to every problem. And that's God. Proverbs 25, verses 6 and 7. Do not put yourself forward in the king's presence, or stand in the place of the great. For it is better to be told, come up here, than to be lower in the presence of a noble. See, we are tempted to believe that what happens in our world, what happens to us, is at the mercy of the humans around us. What's going to happen in our lives and in our church, we're at the hands of whatever political organization sets their dominance, and then we set that into our mind and our heart. And we get into an aspect that all of a sudden we're striving. We begin to strive for position. We begin to strive for all of these things. But we weren't called to strive. We're called to work hard, but we don't have to strive. Striving comes from thinking I need to be in control of the outcome. So it thinks that I've got to do something, but rest, peace, and provision comes from trusting in God. That no matter the outcome, God, I'm going to trust you. 1 Peter 5, therefore, humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God, that he may exalt you in due time, casting all of your care upon him, for he cares for you. See, humility is done voluntarily. How do I know? 1 Peter 5. Therefore, humble yourselves. Humility and humbleness is something that I have to do. I've been given the power to step into these moments, but I have to do it. God's not going to come and knock my knees out from under me. We have to step into these moments and go, I have to recognize that I'm not the answer to every question. And when we do that, this is how we can pray, knowing that in due time, He will exalt, because He cares. Sometimes the hardest and best work is stepping back and being quiet. That's an act of faith. Sometimes stepping back and just going, you know what? I'm not going to try and step my foot into this one. I'm just going to step to the back of the room. Not out of forced humility. Look at me. I'm stepping back. Everybody look at me. Because then you're not stepping into humility. But going, you know what? I recognize there's a lot of smart people in the room. And I don't have to give the answer to every question. Man, so guys, hear what you're saying. I don't have to be a part of this. But knowing in the right time, in the right moment. This is how I can pray for those that are looking for advancement in a job. Lord, help them to continue to do the right thing, knowing that in the right season, advancement will come. See, I don't have to go push my face in front of my boss. See, I'm doing my job. Just do your job. And in the right time, in the right season, somebody is going to catch hold of that. And it may be advancement in your current job, and it could be advancement to another job at another place. All we've been called to do is to do the right thing. This is the procession that God, going before you, declares. He was a foreigner. No place, no authority. But Jesus, by this, my Father is glorified, that you bear much fruit, and so prove to be my disciples. A true disciple is one that bears fruit. If you're not bearing fruit, you're not yet a disciple. That's a hard one. We have to bear fruit. If you are a disciple, you will bear fruit. These things I've spoken to you, so that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation. Man, I'm here to uplift you today. In this world, you're going to have a tough day, a tough month, a tough year. But take courage. I have overcome the world. The victory is stated from a past tense. This means by faith, we can apprehend a sense of victory, even when we're still in the pit. Even when I'm still going through the darkness, I can still step into that. That is why He always causes us to triumph. This is why we can know these things. The victory is already yours. He's already supplied the victory. I don't care where you are from the dream through the process. The victory is already yours, even while you're standing in the pit. You may feel forgotten, but the victory is already yours. Let me give you a story. Snowboarders get 2 runs in the Olympics. It means they get to go down twice when they're competing for the gold. In 2010, a legendary snowboarder, Shaun White, went last. And on his first run, his score was much higher than anyone else's first run, or even second run score. In other words, he made his own second run totally irrelevant. He had already won the gold. By the time he'd gotten back up for his second run, the gold was already his. For his second run, Shaun White could have slid down this half pipe on his stomach. Or he could have just said, you know what, I'm not even going to run it. He would have still ended up wearing the gold around his neck. And as his coach walked up to him, he said, Shaun had this look on his face. And his coach grabbed him by the shoulders and just kind of shook him for a second. Like, snap out of it, we're not done yet. Shaun already had the gold. But he looked Shaun in the eye and he said, this second run is your run. You've already got the gold. Doesn't matter what happens. But I'm telling you today that under the banner of this gold that you already have, I want you to go down the half pipe and I want you to perform whatever in the world you want to perform. Because you already have the gold. The victory's already yours. Doesn't matter what it looks like as you go down. And they say Shaun's face changed. And he said, okay. He said the smile that was on him was like the kid that originally learned how to snowboard. That love for the sport. And he went down that second and final run. And they said some of the tricks that he was performing as he was going down this run had never been seen before. And his second run scored higher than his first run. Why? Because it didn't matter. He already had the victory. All he had to do was go down the hill. See, you already have the victory. Christ purchased the victory for you on Calvary. He died. He was laid in a tomb. But he rose again. See, it could have been, he's in the tomb. It's over with. But there was a third day. There was a day that he came out of that tomb. You may feel today like you're in the tomb. That you've been buried alive. But the scriptures say the same power that raised Christ Jesus from the dead resides on the inside of you and me. So guess what that means? If the power is there, if the power is already there, then why are you still in the tomb? Maybe it's time in that season that God's standing at the head of the tomb like he did with Lazarus, and he said, Lazarus, come forth. But today, the victory's already yours. For some of you, the stone's already been rolled away. But you've been so caught up in the drama of the world around you that you didn't realize you were already free. You didn't realize you were already alive. You've been trying to act like a dead person when you've been alive. You're still sitting around in your grave clothes. When God's already spoken and declared you are free. So for some of you, you need to take off the grave clothes and you need to remind yourself that I have the robe of righteousness on me. That God's given me power and authority over darkness. Victory is yours. So if I realize victory is mine, what do I do with it? I look towards the heavens. From where does my help come from? So God, what do you want me to do today? If this is the day that you're calling me out of the tomb, then I'm coming out. But if this is the day and I'm still sitting in the pit, and you say, just a little while longer, I'm going to say, Lord, I'm going to worship you and I'm going to serve you with everything I have on the inside of me. I'm going to declare, even when I'm the only one in the pit, that great is the Lord and worthy to be praised. Great and powerful is his name. Where are you at today? Victory is already yours. Freedom is already yours. All it takes is you shifting your perspective, reminding yourself that even in the pit, God is still God. And there's a day coming. There's a day coming. Lazarus was in the grave 4 days. When they rolled the stone away, they said, man, don't do it, he stinks. But see, God speaks life into stinky situations. God speaks life into stinky situations. That's the kind of God he is. He's okay to get in the mess with you. He doesn't just step into something and go, here's a rope, but he steps down in there with you and climbs out with you. Because his word says, I'll never leave you nor forsake you. So where are you at today? Where's the struggle? Where's the pain? Where's the hurt? You've got a dream. You know there's an outcome, but somewhere in between you're stuck. And you got into pity party mode. Everybody else's problem. So I'm going to ask you this. This is a tough one. And I don't want an emotional response. I want a sincere response. Wherever you're at in the process, are you willing to worship him no matter how long it takes? Are you ready to bring back into focus the things of the kingdom, whether you're in the pit or the tomb for another day, another 5 years, whatever it looks like? Are you willing to worship him?